Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us. You're watching OBN Horn of Africa. This is Future Africa Show. And today we're going to discuss about the U.S. interference in Ethiopian sovereign affairs. And an independent journalist, An Garrison, is here to vote on the reality which is going on in Ethiopia. And Garrison, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, recently you appeared on RT TV, which is Russian TV, on a show entitled Red Acted Tonight. And you have discussed a lot of things about Ethiopian politics. And before going to your interview on that day, you have uttered saying US out of Africa. What does it mean by? Is US in Africa now, in the entire continent, you mean?
Yes, AFRICOM is all over the African continent except Eritrea, which is part of the reason I'm sure for tension here. And yes, the US military has no business being in Africa. US based corporate interests have no business being aggressive in Africa or asking the US military to be aggressive on their behalf in Africa. That doesn't mean that US corporate interests shouldn't be there. The great industrial powers are going to be involved inevitably in the development of Africa, as China is right now.
Exactly.
But they should do it honestly. They should do it honestly and fairly.
On that specific show, you have again discussed the very reality of the ongoing situation in Ethiopia, right? And of course, we Ethiopians know what's going on here, and you guys have to tell the reality to the remaining global community. And because you are impartial, you don't have any business to just to orchestrate and to fabricate a false narrative stories out of the clash or out of the situation which is going on in Ethiopia.
Okay, now first, briefly, I want to say that when I'm talking about the US and the US in Africa, I mean the US and the corporate and oligarchic interests it represents. That's not the same as the American people. So when I mean the American people, I'll say that. Otherwise, if I say the US, I'm talking about the US and the corporate and the ruling class interests that it represents. Now, I'm not going to be telling you anything you don't know, but I'll tell you what I'll tell you what I understand of the Ethiopian conflict. The TPLF, the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, attacked a federal army base in Tigray province on November 3rd in the middle of the night and murdered federal army soldiers. The Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, responded by sending the National Army into Tigray to put down the insurrection, as any head of state would. A civil war ensued, and pretty soon, the US and EU officials started blaming the Ethiopian National Army for everything that happened. They started wailing about genocide and crimes against humanity, as they always do when they want to undermine the state in question, in this case, Ethiopia. They launched a massive disinformation campaign. They passed a censure resolution in the US Congress. Then they voted to sanction Ethiopia, and the EU voted to sanction Eritrea, which is a big part of this story. And they tried to get the UN Security Council and the African Union to intervene in Ethiopia, but both said this is a matter of Ethiopian sovereignty. And at the UNSC, the UN Security Council, the US and EU weren't even able to get a censure resolution. That's the first step. You pass a resolution saying Ethiopia is bad, they're committing crimes against humanity, et cetera, mass atrocities in their own country. But Ethiopia, China and Russia both vetoed a resolution like that. So the US and EU are on their own in this.
Is there any nation who could tolerate this atrocious act? Is there any leader or is there any nation who could tolerate such a savage act which triggered on its military base? What if Biden were on a position of Prime Minister Abiy? Would he keep silent without taking any counter offensive for a bad act taken on the National Army base? What is your insight on this regard?
There is no head of state I know of who would tolerate a militia attack on its national army. None I can think of. Sometimes some states are so weak that they will surrender to a foreign power that is so large and powerful that they can't resist. And something I should say about Ethiopia is that it is large and powerful. It has the fastest growing economy in Africa, and it's about to complete the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which will provide electricity to the whole country, electricity for sale, so it will generate revenue, and greatly increase its manufacturing capacity. So Ethiopia has the potential to become a regional powerhouse and to negotiate from strength with people who want to do business there. If Ethiopia is split up into a bunch of ethnic states, those states will not be negotiating from the strength that a united Ethiopia will be. If this happened in the United States, Biden would send the army and or the National Guard in to put down the insurrection, arrest the insurrectionists, and put them on trial for treason. No doubt about that. And we started our 4-year American Civil War started when the Confederacy, which wanted to secede, fired on Fort Sumter. That's a fort on the East Coast.
By the time Dr. Abiy took office in 2018, the entire world gave him a round of applause and appreciated his efforts and initiatives, particularly on the initiatives taken in resolving the long year fight between Ethiopia and repatriating the contesting political parties who reside abroad, who were in exile, and granting amnesty. And recently he has launched so many mega projects. He has introduced his own philosophy, which is called synergy, like more of unity related philosophies and ideologies in it. And he coined a homegrown economy, homegrown economic strategies. And Westerners, through course of time, preferred to give him a cold shoulder and again preferred to stand beside the rebel TPLF. And what is their point of departure? At what point and where did the US and the European Union departed from Abiy's move?
Well, I really doubt that they were happy about the alliance with Eritrea to start with, although that was when Donald Trump was president and he wasn't as aggressive in this situation. But the US has been hostile to Eritrea for decades because it has a different some sort of socialist economy, which I can't say I fully understand, but definitely an alternative economic model. And because it refuses to cooperate with AFRICOM, the US Africa Command. The TPLF was the US puppet throughout the time that it was in power. It sent the Ethiopian military into Somalia to further the collapse of the Somalian state. And it sent troops to so-called peacekeeping operations all over the continent, which largely means forces that manage conflict and chaos, often conflict and chaos that the US has created in the way that it's trying to create conflict and chaos in Ethiopia right now. So they lost their puppet. I looked at Ethiopia's resource wealth, and it seems to me like the greatest resource wealth Ethiopia has is hydropower potential, huge hydropower potential, and arable land, much of which is not being cultivated, but might be cultivated if the dam is completed, because it could power well, I'm getting into too much detail, but those are its main resources. I don't think it has a lot of mineral wealth to exploit, or at least not any that anybody has found yet. And it's important strategically for Ethiopia and Eritrea and Somalia to form an alliance that represents an independent force in Africa. Like I said, Ethiopia is becoming a very strong nation. An alliance between Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia, possibly even other countries in the Horn, would be even stronger. And the US and the EU do not like strength. They like weakness. They like to see African countries struggling in debt servitude, paying vast amounts of interest on debt every year, and sending far more wealth to the European and US countries than is returned. And also to make them reliant on aid. And one of the things that's very impressive about Prime Minister Abiy is that self-sufficiency and the ability to negotiate from strength are priorities of his.
The United States of America and the Biden administration made aid cuts on some staff and declared visa restriction on higher government officials. And was that a justifiable decision? And for what reason did they pass, or they decided on such sovereign nation?
Well, they say it's because the Ethiopian state and national army are responsible for the war, even though the TPLF started it, and that the prime minister and the national army are responsible for all of the atrocities that have been committed in the war. That's what they always say. Whenever you hear Samantha Power start talking about genocide and then start talking about Rwanda, Yugoslavia, Syria, she doesn't talk much more. She doesn't talk much about Libya anymore, because I think the whole world knows what a disaster that was. But when she starts wailing about genocide and mass atrocities, you know that the US and the EU want to undermine an independent African nation.
Recently, Samantha Power paid a visit to Ethiopia, and she just forwarded her remark by urging the Ethiopian government to sit for negotiation with the rebel TPLF. How dare a certain US aid staff or aid would involve in making a political decision on a certain sovereign country?
No, she's supposed to be responsible for US aid in Africa. Yeah. But she's acting like a Secretary of State, or perhaps like the UN ambassador that she was. And she said during her congressional hearings, when she was approved by the US Congress, she said that she would use her office to try to stop China. I mean, that's ridiculous. The US is not going to stop China in Africa. But because the only way the US leads the world anymore is militarily. So when it's losing in other ways, it will move in and create chaos and use proxy wars, proxy forces, humanitarian intervention, condemnation. The same is true of France or EU countries, particular France, which has had such a presence in Africa They were losing in the contest for uranium in Mali, Niger, and Central African Republic, and they intervened militarily, justifying it on the basis of human rights, humanitarian grounds, Black Africans killing each other. That's the insulting, condescending thing about this. They're always saying, oh, these Black Africans are killing each other. We have to go in and do something about it. It's just, as an American, it's mortifying to me to hear them go on like this all the time.
How do you describe the geopolitical importance of Horn of Africa and Ethiopia to the West?
Well, of course, it's there. The Horn is there where there are key waterways, the Red Sea, the Strait of Hormuz. I can't remember the name of the strait that, from the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean, but a vast amount of the world's oil passes along the Ethiopian coast and through these straits that are there also on its coast. From the Middle Eastern countries, and also I think probably soon Somalia. I think the US and EU interest in Somalia is that it has vast untapped oil reserves. That's one of the issues there. Strategically, it's very militarily strategic, I would say, given its position between the Middle East and Southern Africa and its location on all these waterways. And as I said, Prime Minister Abiy and the current Ethiopian government are interested in independence. And independence is the opposite of the USA's military and geostrategic motives. I write for the Black Agenda Report, and we recently lost our brilliant editor, Glenn Ford. And he said once that to become geostrategic, a nation just has to resist the US. There's a tiny island, Grenada, on the edge of the West Indies that produced nothing but nutmeg. It was the so-called nutmeg capital of the world. And the US destroyed its government, took military action. Grenada wasn't able to resist. And this was simply, the US did this simply because Grenada was refusing to accept US domination.
Whenever the US government is intervening in a certain country's political or in a certain country's sovereign affairs, there is always destruction. We can mention Libya, Iraq, Somalia. We can mention again Syria, Yemen, and Afghanistan as well. And what is in your mind about the intervention of the US in Ethiopia? Are they going to do what they have done in various destabilized countries? Are they want to balkanize Ethiopia, or what is their intention?
I believe that if they cannot put their puppet, the TPLF, back in power, or find another puppet, they would rather see Ethiopia either fragmented into ethnic states, which, as I've said, would have far less power to resist, to negotiate, than a strong, united Ethiopia, or they would rather see it become ungovernable, chaotic, like Libya, because they don't like independence. They don't want to negotiate with independence and strength, which Ethiopia has been gaining quite a bit, Ethiopia has been becoming stronger and stronger, and has the potential to become even stronger when the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam starts providing power to the whole country and neighbors.
After 2 decades of bitter struggle, the Taliban military wing controlled and took over the entire Afghanistan. And what was the role of the United States of America?
Well, way back in, I think it was the 80s, the US encouraged and armed Islamic extremists to fight the Russians who were engaged in Afghanistan at the time. And those Islamic extremists eventually came back to allegedly bomb the World Trade Center and inspire the war on terror. However, there's plenty of evidence, especially in Syria, for example, that the US has actually sponsored terrorists, jihadi terrorists, and used them as their proxy forces. Definitely in Syria. Another thing I might say about Afghanistan is that that was a huge, tragic failure. Obviously, the US never understood Afghanistan. All the troops it trained and armed weren't interested in fighting. And the US lost many troops and vast amounts of money by making a huge troop commitment. I don't think that the US will start any more wars that involve a huge troop commitment like that. I don't think Ethiopia has to worry about that. I don't even think that the US will bomb Ethiopia. I know there's some concern that Ethiopia could be the next Libya, but I don't think the US will either make a large troop commitment there or do any aerial bombing. Am I getting away from Afghanistan?
It doesn't matter. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You have, I mean, the US.
So can we say US is loser when it comes to Afghan politics now?
Yes, and it's harder and harder for me to see how they're going to win in Ethiopia. It seems like aggravating ethnic strife is their best hope, creating chaos, to see Ethiopia collapse on itself, collapse into different ethnic states is probably their best hope of stopping the strong, independent Ethiopia that they don't want to see. And I should have also said that I really don't think the US will consider aerial, well, they might consider it, but I don't think you have to worry about aerial bombing because the sight of a white nation bombing a Black African nation, the optics of that would just be too bad in the United States domestically, given Black Lives Matter, and given that 13.5% of the US population is Black, and that doesn't even include all the people who now identify as mixed race with African American in the mix. But the Arab population of the US is only 3.5%, much smaller. There are 49 million African Americans. So I can't imagine that. And also, Ethiopia is a very rough terrain. Obviously, the Ethiopian people would resist. And Daniel Feltman, the US special envoy to the Horn, said that a war in Ethiopia would make Syria look like a picnic. So again, I think that supporting proxy forces like the TPLF, possibly Sudanese forces, some sort of Egyptian help, and most of all, trying to cause ethnic chaos in Ethiopia is the strategy they're most likely to pursue. And I have learned a bit about this. I mean, I don't want to tell you about your own country.
Yeah, tell us.
Okay. I have learned that Abiy's challenge and the challenge of Ethiopia, its greatest challenge is to create a sense of citizenship, Ethiopian citizenship, that supersedes tribalism, not ethnic identity. I don't get the idea from any of the advocates of Ethiopian citizenship and nation building that they want to suppress the many languages and ethnic traditions in Ethiopia, but they want Ethiopians to have equal rights in all of its states. And I've learned a bit about the Constitution and why it exacerbates ethnic conflict, and those who want to promote Ethiopian citizenship over tribalism think the Constitution should be changed. And again, I think the US best strategy will be to aggravate ethnic conflict.
So what do you urge to the Ethiopian government and the Biden administration on the ongoing situation and the relationship between Ethiopia and the United States of America is very historic, and it goes back to so many millennia, right? What has to be done to resolve the ongoing tension?
Well, I think the United States, and again, I'm not talking about the American people, I mean, US and its corporate and ruling class interests, has to learn to deal with the rest of the world fairly and honestly, has to respect sovereignty, and has to accept a strong Ethiopia. Now, again, most American people probably couldn't even find Ethiopia on a map. And this military aggression and whatever else is coming, sanctions, financial strangulation, an attempt to reduce Ethiopia to ethnic chaos, this in no way serves the interests of the American people. And I think the American people have more in common with the Ethiopian people than these corporate interests who want to dominate and exploit it.
Anything that you need to address, or if you have any remark to forward, please welcome.
The United States bombs and robs and supports authoritarian regimes. And again, I'm talking about the corporate and oligarchic interests represented by the government. They bomb, rob, and create chaos and support authoritarian regimes more than any other nation in the world. So it's absolutely ridiculous for them to claim to have humanitarian interests in Ethiopia. That is just garbage. And I very much want to see the dam filled and see Ethiopia become a strong, independent, united nation.
Yeah, that's great. An Garrison, an independent journalist, thank you for your expertise and scholarly analysis on the ongoing situation in Ethiopia. And see you next time with another agenda. You will be our guest on different issues now onward.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me.
All right, a pleasure.
Okay, bye-bye.
Dear viewers, once again, thank you for joining us. I would like to wrap up my discussion with an independent journalist, An Garrison from United States of America on various issues on the ongoing situation in Ethiopia. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye. See you next time with another edition.